17th session this last 2 days, so it's been action-packed. No pressure. This is the last panel that we have of the day, so those will be lasting impressions. So what you guys say is very important because it's going to be this great takeaway, I'm sure, today. I want to introduce our moderator who kindly accepted our invitation to moderate this all-star panel. This is great. Daryn Jones became a staple of Canadian television when he was named star and creative producer of MTV Canada's flagship series, MTV Live. During his 6 years on MTV, he had an opportunity to interview a variety of newsworthy guests, including Tom Cruise, Jake Gyllenhaal, Weird Al Yankovic,
yeah, I know, right?
Adele, and Quentin Tarantino. Previously, Daryn was a writer and an on-air contributor on the Rick Mercer Report. That's off air now, isn't it?
It's not my fault.
And was the star and creator of the series Buzz on the Comedy Network. As a comedian, Daryn tours the country regularly, and he has headlined Just for Laughs 42 in Toronto and the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. On the radio side, Daryn is currently the host of Kiss at Night on Kiss 92.5, which is what my son listens to all the time. Oh, I'm not supposed to say that. I work at Chorus. So. And previously was a guest host of The Rush and the Evan Solomon Show on News Talk 1010. Daryn's comedy series, talk series, Daryn Jones Live at CBC, currently airs at cbc.ca.
That's right. Thank you, George. Hi, everybody. This feels like the midnight slot at Yuck Yucks. Tough crowd slot. Kim, thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this. Kim Geddes, my pal over at News Talk 1010. And this is going to be a very interesting panel. And you don't want to go outside anyways because it's humid. It's much nicer in here, so just trust me on that one. So we're going to be talking about how to remodel your radio and TV news broadcasts, although given that you're all TV, we'll probably focus more on the television digital side of things. I figured the discussion will go in two parts, and I want to know, and I'm very curious about this as a news junkie, not a news professional, but a news junkie. I also don't have cable. I'm 40, I have 2 kids, I have a house in the city. I get my news on Twitter first, and then I dive down to get context on all the different sites. And it's interesting, having sampled all of what you all do, how the information gets to you, and how the video gets to you, and how the context gets to you. It's tricky navigating it nowadays, and where traditional broadcasts fit into that. So we're going to talk about that, and then we'll discuss how to change what you're doing to reflect how people are finding news. But let's go through and meet our panel. So you guys get to sit through the awkward bio portion of this, which is always fun. So Michael Gruzuk.
Like music.
Thank you. I just know him as Mike, right? No. Okay, so Michael is the Senior Director of Content Experience for CBC News, overseeing storytelling, new programming, special projects, and talent development. Prior to this role, Michael was the Director of News and Digital for Vice Canada. He was previously a program leader at the national CBC News Marketplace and was the executive producer of CBC News Specials, overseeing all domestic and international news events, including CBC's coverage of the 2015 federal election. He's also a graduate of Columbia University School of Journalism. Mm.
Okay. But I've never met Adele.
You never met Adele?
No.
Francis D'Souza has been a recognizable face at City for more than 15 years. He began as the weekend anchor in 2002 and is now the dual role of CityNews journalist and senior manager editorial. His live coverage during the G20 in Toronto, the summit, was recognized with the Gemini Award for Best Breaking Reportage in 2011. I'd be curious to see how things have shifted from 2011 to now, reporting on things. I'd be curious. He's also reported on countless federal, provincial, and municipal elections from live locations across the country, provided national coverage of the Calgary floods, was there for the election of Pope Francis in Rome and in London during the Great Kate Wait. In the delivery room. I don't know how he got in there. He caught the baby.
Prince George, yeah.
It was an international scandal. So that is Francis. And then Natalie Alcoba You've been the managing editor of Vice News in Canada since its launch in 2015, leading award-winning coverage on national issues such as the crisis of unsafe drinking water in Indigenous communities, the opioid epidemic, and legalization of weed. Prior to that, she held a number of positions at the National Post, reporting on crime, education, courts, and City Hall during the Rob Ford years. She
Survived.
has also worked at the Toronto Star, the Montreal Gazette, and the Hamilton Spectator, and has had stories published from Argentina, Sierra Leone, India, and was most recently a Southern Journalism Fellow at Massey College, based at the University of Toronto. Okay, so there's your panel. Yes, come on, gang. Okay, so let's discuss the show. So we're talking about the evening show. What is it called?
Vice News Tonight.
Right, Vice News Tonight, and then City News, and then the National. These are your flagships, your broadcasts, your big tent shows. Okay, so let's talk about the individual shows and the changes to the format. We'll start with Natalie. I'm curious about, I guess, when was the inception, and what was the focus going forward, and what shifts have you had to make to honor the audience that you want to find?
Sure. So Vice News Tonight launched in October 2016 out of the US. It's almost exclusively an American production. As a Canadian office, we've fed into it here and there, but the operations are based in New York. And the concept was essentially to turn a weekly show that we had on HBO called Vice on HBO into a daily news broadcast. Take that same depth that we provided at that weekly show, but in a little bit of a quicker format. And of course, I mean, we set out to bring millennials onto cable. So the show is on HBO, and its format it's 22 minutes. The front end of it has a real digital feel to it, I think I would say. The way the information is presented feels almost the same way that you would see it online in terms of things scrolling past, going up, really bold graphics, simple, quick at the top. And then the back half of it, which is actually the bulk of the show, we've got 4 or 5 pieces that are 4 to 5 minutes long that go deep on an issue. So it's the balance of the pace that we think our audience is used to, in terms of consumption, but then bringing what we also think our audience wants, which is the complexity of a story. So our broadcasts are not so much about what has happened, but the context around it, truly. And so we think that, I mean, in particular, if you want to get new people, if you want to bring them into this medium, then you've got just to give them something different, right? Like more nuance. Sometimes more voice in the form of the correspondent. We don't have an anchor, and so we use the correspondents as the real authority voice to kind of take people through.
Okay, and I want to get to all the shows, but I'll bookmark this. I'll be very curious to know how a millennial audience. I mean, they don't have cable, they don't have HBO, so how the heck are you supposed to, if your priority is traditional broadcast, they're not seeing it. So where are they finding you? But we'll get to that in a second for sure. Okay, Francis, talk to me about City News. You guys made a ton of changes.
Yeah, City News was your regular newscast up to about 3 years ago. It was, I think City has always had a history of innovative content and an innovative format. The first to sort of ditch the anchor desk and make it the living newsroom. That was what Moses had said. Open up the windows, let people look inside, let people see the process of how television was created. And over the years, we were bought over by Rogers, and Rogers came in and sliced and diced and chopped away, and we ended up with a very standard newscast. And we knew we had to make a change if we needed to be successful in the market. We were a number 4. And we had to do better because we didn't want to be cut anymore. And Rogers at the time, our CEO, there was a big emphasis on innovation within the company. And it was very unique because I don't think any other media company would have allowed us to do this. And it was about 4 of us that sat in a room one day. We booked off our calendar for a day. We started with a blank piece of paper and said, if we want to design a newscast today, for today, how would we do it? And that's how we did it. We started literally with a blank piece of paper, and we said, okay, let's design it from the bottom up. And just like Natalie said about the social feed, we sort of envisioned it like a Facebook feed as well, where you just scroll from one story to the next, one story to the next. And it was quite evident that we didn't need an anchor to do that. And we actually felt that the anchor role for us, which is actually kind of funny that they put anchor in my title there because that doesn't exist. We wanted to put the emphasis on the journalism. And we felt that if you look at a traditional newscast, the anchor starts, and you want to always give your anchor a big bulky script. So sometimes those scripts were anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds, to make the anchor. And we felt that's wasted time. Let's get right to the journalists. So let's have the journalists present the news from where the news is actually taking place. And we said, let's ditch the studio completely. And let's bring the news from where it's happening on location. You can imagine our technical people when we said we want to be live in like 7, 8 different locations a night. And just the coordination, the control room staff were, we knew they were going to lose their minds because, we would having to coordinate 8 or 9 live different locations, all in the field, right? No teleprompters, because we've never really used teleprompters in the field. And we would have our journalists literally be presenting the newscast out in the field with iPads. And we eventually got a newsroom system that allowed us to have iPad integration, so our scripts just flow on the iPad. We still had a couple writers at in the newsroom to write the non-reported content, but essentially we put the emphasis on the story and let the newscast form. And one thing is, our format that we decided to develop is the non-format. So we said the playbook is this: you can start your show 40 different ways. Figure out the 40 different ways to start your show, and so it's not just teasers or your headlines and then go into your good evening. It can start any way you want it to start. And I think what it's evolving into and what it will continue to evolve into is we're going to be more reflective of our audience demand and what our audience wants. And we're going to be able then to take our content and literally put it on any platform.
I'd be curious to know, on the financial side, because we know that news is everything is cut to the bone in Canada as far as production goes. I wonder if there's any pushback with your technical people, because we're getting awfully close to the point where I could I know I can pull my phone out and we can live broadcast right now. So the idea of the truck and the people and the this, that, and the other, the whole crew, it's getting to the point where it's hard to justify all of those bodies. And I'm wondering if there is pushback from, rightfully so, from the people who don't want to be made redundant through technology.
We negotiated, and I was at the table, we negotiated a very successful contract with our union.
Gotcha.
This past November. They were happy. Everyone left the table very happy and very positive. They know there's a role to play. There's craft journalism to still do, and you still need people to construct craft journalism. It can be done in a different way, but as we expand now across the country, everyone knows that we're hiring. We're the only ones expanding, and we're looking to bring back news into every major market in Canada. And we already launched Edmonton and Winnipeg last year. This September, we're launching Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal. And there, again, we're doing it in the same format, but we're not doing it in the same way that television, that you would think of starting a television station. We're not building a set. Sets cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even a virtual set costs money to design the set. We're not doing a set because our journalists will be live presenting the news live in the field. So we can do it in a much more economically sound way.
I'll be curious to talk later about the local effect. I mean, you talk about it as a Facebook feed. People want to know what's happening on their corner, and it's expensive to populate across the country. I'd be very curious to talk about that. But let's talk about the national, Michael. Traditionally an older demographic and older broadcast. You're also coming in at, what time do you air? Is it 10 o'clock?
9 o'clock on News Network, 10 o'clock on CBC Television.
Okay, so by that point in the day, everybody knows the stories. Everybody has their headlines. They're not coming to you to learn what happened. So how are you, and you went through major, with Peter Mansbridge retiring last year, major shift with 4 anchors. Talk to me about how you're negotiating 2018 while not disrespecting this audience that you rely on for ratings and money?
This is a much scrutinized project, and it's ongoing. It's only been on the air for 6 or 7 months at this point. And I have to remind the team that works on the National of that, Francis used the word evolution, and that's truly what we are positioning the program to be, is how does it evolve and have the tools so that it can be responsive, that it can follow the audience need, which is the fundamental thing that I push the team to be always thinking about, is what do they need from you at the end of the day? Not what do you want to be and what the tropes of the past have been, but what do they need? The National is a very, it's a rare product in the sense that CBC continues to invest in a primetime news program. 10 o'clock is prime time. We're up against, I don't know actually what other shows are on all the other networks night by night, but we're up against those serialized crime shows that pull in huge audiences. People are tired. We're fighting against people who want to escape into other worlds, or we're fighting against someone's book, or I often think we're fighting against someone's body because they just want to go to sleep and they're tired. So the fact that CBC still invests an hour of news and current affairs in the primetime schedule that could be sold off and be making money in these different genres is a real testament to the public broadcaster, but a significant challenge for us in terms of what an hour of news means to somebody and what they need from it at the end of the day. So what we did is we looked at the incredible legacy of what had existed, and it's an incredibly long-running program. And with Peter's retirement, we knew that we had an opportunity to make some pretty significant change. It would have been easier, I'm telling you, it would have been easier to just change a single host. And that was a route that was considered. But a lot of the things that Natalie and Francis are talking about, while these programs look different, we're all talking about positioning for the future in a different way. And we know that the journalism is what matters and that story is what matters. So we looked at how can we have a show that's flexible, that takes you places, that gives you depth and context at the end of the day when you already know the majority of what has happened, and that was behind all of the choices with the journalists that you see. I think a lot of people were surprised to see someone like Adrienne Arsenault revealed on the day that she was there, but it was, I'll tell you, it was the most obvious choice at the beginning of the process because we knew we wanted to put our best storytellers as opposed to our best presenters. Mm-hmm. People don't need to be presented to anymore. They need to believe who they're listening to. And so we've created a program that takes that takes 4 journalists who are all experts in many ways in different areas, and bring them together to take you into the news of the day and bring additional depth and context to the stories that you've heard about. It's not always clear to the audience why each of the hosts is doing the story that they're doing, and we're continuing to work on that and listen to the audience as they respond to it. But I have to say, there's a lot of opinion about the change because it's such a radical change. And to your question, core audience, I grew up with the National on in my parents' bedroom. I remember when I ended up working with Mansbridge. I remember thinking I used to just see that man's face every night when I'd go in and say goodnight to my parents, and there he is sitting in front of me now in real life. It's an institution that's in a lot of people's lives. And it's a radical thing to change someone's bedtime routine, which is literally what we were doing. So there was a lot of reaction, but we've also received an incredible amount of positive reaction in terms of the range of the hosts and what they're starting to see in the storytelling style. And we have total confidence that we're positioning it to continue to evolve in terms of the way that those hosts do a lot of the things that Natalie and Francis are talking about going into the heart of story and you really believing them at the end of the day because they haven't just been sitting there working on an introduction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about how you, I can't even imagine, like the way a news story goes from like, oh my God, something's happened, to we're not on till 10 or 6 or whenever. You run the risk of getting left behind. So being first with the information is very important. In my line, I don't work in news, but last night, Drake released a diss track where he was slamming Pusha T and Kanye, and that was a big deal for my audience. So we produced a video and got it up like 10 minutes after it went. I can afford to be incorrect with some facts when I'm talking about Drake and Pusha T. However, you cannot with important news. I'm thinking, the bombing in Mississauga, the Yonge Street disaster, all of these different things. However, I know personally when this happens, I'm on Twitter going, oh my God, who's got the information beyond the top line? Like, I know this has happened. Is there a live video broadcast? Is there a Facebook feed of someone I trust as well? That's the other thing, because there's a lot of yahoos with cell phones now. So as people who, are journalists and work in news journalism, how do you marry the idea that we got to be there first because people need news now and we got to get it right, and we are also not on till later?
Well,
and I open it up to the panel. Feel free to discuss.
I'll challenge you on that because we're on right now. CityNews has a digital presence, just like all of us do, and right now is what's important. So our journalists go out, and on the, like the Yonge Street attack, for instance, our journalists were doing. We did our morning host lives in the area and got off a subway, and I called her and I said, go on Facebook Live right now. And I think within an hour or two, we were up to something like 80,000 views on that. And she was just live on Facebook for 45 minutes to an hour and just walking around talking to people. What we do then is we take that content that she gathered live that was going out to Facebook Live, and we turned that for the broadcast. So no more are we producing as our, and we have a 5 o'clock deadline. We're not producing for a 5 o'clock broadcast. We're producing for right now, gathering content, putting content out, and then utilizing that content within our broadcast. So it's a complete shift. It's a total remodel, if you will, of how a newscast is constructed. Because even when I started, 15 years ago at City, and I worked for CTV before that, you would go out, you would spend all day gathering, you would come back. When I was at CTV in Northern Ontario, you had the luxury of sitting at your desk and writing your stand-ups, right? And then going back out, and everyone stood in front of that one tree, right, to shoot their stand-up. And you'd go back in, you'd edit your story, and you'd say, whew, okay, I made my deadline for 6 o'clock, right? And now it's completely different. You need it now because that's where our audience is. Our audience has changed. All of our audiences are diminishing by the minute, right? We have lost 20% of our audience year over year.
On the TV side of things.
On the broadcast side,
So that's where the thinking, in my opinion, needs to
news.
change, because the audience hasn't gone anywhere else.
Right.
They're not less interested in news. They're just not, they don't have cable. That's
right. And
right?
so our format allows us to get that content out immediately, but then also provide good context for our viewing audience. And again, we've had success. So from the number 4, we're up to a strong number 2. We compete with number 1, which is a good thing.
I think it's ultimately just about providing different kinds of content on different platforms, right? So understanding what the function is of your broadcast, if you set out to do something that is about the complexity of the world and how things kind of work together and the context around it versus what's happened. Vice, all of us, these are organizations that have presences across platform, right? So, your reporter is himself or herself a brand ambassador and is creating content for things like Twitter. You are also developing short social videos that are things that literally fly by in 30, 40 seconds that you won't see on the broadcast, but is the way some people are consuming that info on Facebook. We're writing, that fast story on the website, and we're developing it as it goes along. And at the same time, we're thinking of different angles that we can bring to it later. And then the broadcast does something else. The way ultimately you're going to get people to a space is by giving them something that they can't get in another space. And so we have to push ourselves every day to really. I fight this all the time, which is the pull of the thing that's happening now, and knowing what your role is in the Canadian media landscape too. Vice News in Canada, we're a tiny operation. We can't be on everything, or sometimes we can't even be on the big things in the fast, immediate way that that CBC would be. So we just need to understand that and then do our thing, because there are people that are going to come to us for what we provide ultimately.
Can I ask you, your audience is interesting because they have no ties to traditional news. They've never watched the 10 o'clock or the 6. That's never been part of their life. So you're kind of unencumbered by these traditions. Can you walk me through an example of a story that your newsroom jumped on and how you attacked it from all the different angles to produce the content wherever your audience might be? I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just kind of curious how Vice works.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've been on this fellowship, but let's talk about the van attack because I got lots of reports in terms of how that worked in the newsroom. And again, so Vice News there are 3 reporters in Toronto and there's an editor, myself. And I'm talking about I'm talking about written content here for digital. But these same individuals are coming up with ideas for short videos too. So we're shifting between mediums. But on that day, instead of thinking in the silos of Vice News, Vice.com, which is a different vertical that has a greater breadth in terms of the kinds of content that it creates, Motherboard, which is our science and tech, they broke down those walls and they just sat down together and worked as a group and assigned people to different stories based on what their area of expertise, and then that content lived on the various verticals. It was actually the first time that we had people that worked at Motherboard bylining stories on Vice News because it was a massive event, and the only way we were going to even make a little bit of a dent in our case was to just think of ourselves as a unit. And then simultaneously, we are liaising with the American desk because there are not many things that interest Americans insofar as what's going on in Canada, but this one did, and so they were on us. And they will also provide support too in terms of reporters from there, like being able to comb different social feeds. So, I mean, when there is a huge news event, I mean, I wish we operated like this more frequently, but when there is a huge news event, we actually bring down the walls and we work together and we just think about what's the best way of using our precious resources. So
yeah, that makes sense.
I don't.
Well, I know in
Vice,
I regularly am on your site because I go for the written stuff as well, and Vice is constantly updating and hitting topics like a day or two later, like thoughtful context and criticism, which is really important in 2018.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if this is a bit of a digression, but one thing I learned early when I came to Vice, because I came from the National Post and I was covering City Hall, and it was very much in the Rob Ford era, what was the thing that happened today, bananas, whatever it was. And then I came to Vice, and often would be like, okay, we can't do this story. We just don't have the people to do it. It's over. And then sometimes we would find a particular angle and revisit it a day or two later and realize that oftentimes our audience hadn't seen it, right? Like these stories still have legs after the fact because people's lives don't revolve around a particular newscast anymore.
Or a story, everyone here is very plugged in, but people have lives. They may be bookmarking things for Friday.
It's interesting because we have found with our audience, we don't have a loyal audience. So our audience does not appointment view like maybe they do on the National. Our audience is not appointment view, so our ratings go all over the place depending on the day. And for us, I think what we found with the evolution of our format is we have a much younger demographic. We have an educated demographic. We have a demographic that makes a lot of money. So on hot days and on Thursday or a Friday night, they're gone at 5 o'clock, right? They're gone at 6 o'clock. They're getting their kids ready for soccer and they're getting their kids ready for activities. And we have to be conscious of that. And I also wanted to talk a little about the walls, the breaking down of the walls. I think we realized that when we're remodeling, we had to break down the walls. Our digital team and our broadcast team operated very separately. And we had to integrate the teams together. We couldn't have a reporter go out and report her story and then hand in the tape, and then a digital writer picked it up and writes the story. But that's what happened. That's what used to happen in our newsroom. And then we also own 680 News. We're all part of the same family. And we also need to partner with radio in order to break down all these silos. It's a little more difficult with radio because we're in different buildings, but we try. We encourage all of our reporters to file for radio. And if a radio reporter is at a story that we're not, well, then they're going to meet up with the camera, and we're trying to get them to file some content for us. So we can break down those barriers and then utilize our resources better.
And that is a key thing, like using a 680 reporter for, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer, but these things, it's like pushing a rock uphill. I want to ask about the national and the digital. CBC is interesting because the national is such a traditional broadcast. However, CBC is very forward-thinking, probably for financial reasons, in their digital strategy. I know I can speak from personal experience. I've got a comedy series that was picked up at cbc.ca for the digital side of things that I didn't even bother pitching to traditional because it just didn't make any sense. So how does the national or the news department feed the digital people like me craving news, as well as the big story at 10?
CBC has made tremendous investments in CBC News in particular in digital. We're the #1 news app in the country. We're the #1 news source for millennials in Canada, and we're continuing to grow there. It's an interesting dilemma as it relates to video. And this is where I'm doing a lot of work right now to position for the future in terms of what is the role of video in digital going forward. It actually gets at the core of what is the role of a reporter going forward. While the notion of, we're talking about TV and TV broadcasts, we do a lot of work looking at where we're going to be, where audience trends are going to be based on the technology that they have in their homes, which is really what tends to guide behavior. And TV will always have a role. There will always be a role for live video and packaged video. I suggest. There are a lot of people who spend a lot of time on this, and I'm one of them inside CBC who's looking at future trends. And so we understand the role of live video, and we're very good at that digitally. If something major is happening, you can go to our site or our app. And as I said, we are the source for that, whether it's the van attack or some kind of potentially mundane political event, we'll be there for that. But what is the role of packaged video, which is what we're actually talking about when we're looking at changing the model for news broadcasts? And that's where we all share this in common. That's where what the reporter is doing and the story being the hero of every decision is the most important thing that we're doing, whether it's for television or whether it's for digital. I'll take our reporter Cam McIntosh in Winnipeg. There's some serious forest fires in Manitoba right now, in and around First Nations community. Little Grand Rapids, I believe, is where it is. A few years ago, Cam would have been assigned to that story, and he would have done a story with a series of elements, as we say in the newsroom. He would have had probably some fire folks and Minister Philpott speaking about it. There would have been all these elements with probably a map, some overhead shots, some people being rescued coming out of a plane. Oh, and a stand-up on a tarmac, probably, right? But there's no use for that video anymore because people are getting that information in text through digital. They know that there are forest fires. They can see that. So what is the role of video? So if you saw what Cam did this week, he did an incredibly focused story where he just went in and out in the herc that was brought into the community of Red Lake, Ontario, because it was the closest place where they could land a plane to be able to bring evacuees in and out from Little Grand Rapids. And he did an incredibly focused story about what it was like just going in and out and the challenges of getting these giant rescue planes back and forth, which is a much more interesting story if you're going to find out, if you want to see some depth and context around a significant news event like that. And that video, to Natalie's point, continues to be watched 2, 3, 4 days later. It's still interesting of the challenge of how you go in and out with these massive rescue planes, whereas the news expires on the day that it happens with the minister with Philpott's clip and just the details of the day. So what we're looking at is how can we pivot our video to be more in-depth, more scene-based, take me there, show me something, and storytelling, which is ultimately what this is about. And great stories, people will watch them 3, 4, 5, maybe 2 weeks later. We could probably bring a story like Cam's back in 3 months when there's a forest fire somewhere else and say, a few months ago he went and showed us the challenges of how to get into these communities, and suddenly the story has legs both in a digital and in a broadcast capacity that it wouldn't have if we were doing it in that very traditional, typical kind of story, a multi-element story.
And similar to Michael, we're also changing our story structure as we evolve. And in the past, for us, but still traditionally, and current journalism students are still taught, right? 10-second clip, 15-second clip, one stand-up, maybe 2 stand-ups if you're doing it city style. VO.
They shouldn't be taught that anymore.
StockViz. No, they shouldn't, but it's happening still.
Stock.
You know, StockViz.
StockViz is
and,
the worst.
I call fake news. That's what StockViz is for me in our newsroom is fake news, right? You know, if taking 6 to 10 voices, condensing it down to 2 that really matter, and instead of a 5-second or a 10-second soundbite, I'm looking for 20 or 30 seconds, more context. And I think in this current day and age, in order to fight fake news, people actually want more context.
Well, and it's interesting because, you know, 10 years ago, we were all taught, if you're doing stuff on the internet, it's got to be so fast because people are idiots in 1 second. But that's not the case. And I do a lot of work on YouTube as well, and I see people, if you're going in depth on something, they found your video because they're curious about that. And to your point of the forest fires, people are finding your video because of the metadata. They're typing in Alberta forest fire or whatever, and that's how they come to you. So they're actually interested in the video. You don't even have to hook them because they've done the work for you in that way. So you could talk on that, and I'd also love to discuss further like the long tail of things and teaching your bosses how that actually works, where it's like the Monday ratings don't matter. Let's look at it 2 weeks from now because anybody, please.
Yeah, we do overall audience engagement reports now that aren't based on overnight TV ratings. I mean, we were just talking about the royal wedding last Saturday, and as we were sitting down, and I was just looking at our audience engagement report on an event like that, and the idea that we would look just at TV ratings is dead in the water. We're so far past that point. We're looking at engagement in social, which is significant and is much more meaningful for us when we can see that people are sharing and commenting and engaging in our content. We're continuing to invest in newsletters, which have a much more meaningful, it's a less passive audience experience. People are choosing to open it and then choosing to read it and then choosing to click through. And these things are as meaningful to us as an overnight rating and somebody passively sitting there with the clicker on channel. What channel is CBC? Depends on who your cable provider is. At my house, it's 544. So
I go through the app. You wanted to say something, Natalie?
Yeah, even just on the metrics point, in the 3 years that I've been at Vice, you know, when I started, first of all, I'd never thought of metrics before, obviously, as a reporter. Yeah. So that was a nightmare and continues to be. But when I started, it was about page views, and now really we place so much more value on loyalty, which is the amount of time that people are spending on your story. And I mean, to your point of like so much coming at you and how fast and quick, there is definitely a place for that in the digital space, but I think, and especially for broadcast, but also in terms of the kinds of videos that are having success, I think like the reality is that people do want us to slow it down. Mm-hmm. Like I think that's one of the reasons as well why like podcasts are so successful, right? Mm-hmm. Like where you take, like The Daily for the New York Times, where you take a thing, you know, maybe 2 things, and you sit with someone and you pull it apart and you connect in some way. And I think I think that potentially could be, you know, a response to the amount of stuff that's being thrown at us, but there's real opportunity, and frankly, that's way more interesting and healthy, in my opinion. I want to be a part of that kind of journalism. We just need to do it.
So a question is talking about the, you know, we all have to deal with the realities of the financial side and advertisers. How do you approach people who are funding all this and go, you know what, yeah, our traditional 2+ ratings are down, but that's junk anyways. The watch time on our website is through the roof, and that's what you should be caring about. How do you tell the people who are in charge that everything you knew it's done, it's over, it's done. People are consuming things differently, and we need to put more emphasis on that. Versus, to your point, like 20% of the audience is gone. That's not true. They might be I watch you through my phone. I'm not a rated person on the TV, but I watch you
for free.
Well, but hey, look, I'm willing to pay. That's not my problem. That's your problem, right? And that's the point, right?
Yeah, it's difficult because, you know, we need to convince our salespeople at Rogers, right, that, hey, sell us, look at us,
right.
Look at us. So we still need to have a successful broadcast product in order for them to go out to the buyers and to sell us. But, you know, so we try to sell ourselves through innovation, that we're a newscast model that is not your not your dad's, Oldsmobile. This is a broadcast that will continue to evolve and that will continue to survive. And we have a 2-hour supper hour broadcast, and on big days, we're not afraid. When I said we have 40 show starts, we also have different models of a newscast. We're not afraid to ditch our newscast. So when the van attack happened at 3 o'clock, I reassigned everybody at 3 o'clock, and everybody had a new role that day, and we put on a 2-hour broadcast that was solely focused on what Toronto was talking about, and at that point the world was just on the van attack. When Gord Downie died, we did the same thing with our format. We blew our format away, and every reporter, all of our content was dedicated towards Gord Downie. We dropped weather, we dropped sports.
Interesting.
And when Rob Ford, this sort of evolved during the Rob Ford era, covering Rob Ford, he would do something at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You're like, oh my God, our top 3 stories aren't relevant anymore. So we're like, no problem. Ditch them all, reassign everyone, and do it live. And we did it. And we have such a flexible format that allows us to do that. And if we can sell that to the advertisers, which is, our salespeople are getting better at that because it's so different. But that, to me, is providing our salespeople with an innovative product that they can actually go out to market and say, this is different. And it's actually successful.
Well, and consumers are interested in niche purchase. Like, I have subscriptions to specific websites. I don't need all the rest. I have this and this and this and this, and I pay my Patreon to my favorite podcasters. And that's kind of, it's a brutal model as an individual trying to get paid, but that's the new model, isn't it? We're going to open it up to questions, I'm sure a lot of you, or discussion. And there's a prop now, so I'm not sure what's happening.
It's the microphone.
Oh, is that how this is working? Okay,
Yeah.
Good.
This is awesome.
What, is this for real?
Yeah, right?
Really?
Yeah. Right? Look at this. I have a question for you, Francis.
That's amazing.
Right?
That's talking into a pillow. That's unbelievable.
Exactly. For Francis, and I may be asking insider information, so if you don't want to answer,
Sure, competition.
That's okay. But you mentioned the synergies between radio and television,
Yeah.
the 680 reporters and the city reporters doing content for both radio and television. How does the 680 reporter who feeds that beast every 30 minutes, how do they have the time to also accommodate you?
And that's our biggest struggle right now. It is our biggest struggle because they feel they need to feed the beast. They feel that they need to, but when you listen to the 680 broadcast, are they constantly updating their story every 30 minutes, or could they park it for 30 minutes and do some television?
How does
Use
that
their
go
iPhone.
Over? How does that go over?
Well, not well. Not well. Not well, but you know what? It's a work in progress, and that's okay. We're, Amber, my colleague from 680 is here, and we're trying. But the thing is, we're trying, and we actually do it very successfully in the morning with Carl Hansky, and he sees that it's actually quite easy to do. So during a morning show, where it's even more important that every half hour, the morning show reporter on 680 needs to have the latest information. He finds time to meet our camera and do something quick. And this goes back to format. We're not asking for a constructed story with multiple clips and VOs and this and that and this and that. What we're saying is, make it easy. Oh my goodness, make it easy. Take your 680 script, maybe deliver the first line on camera, voice the rest. Our editors will cut it, which is why there's still a need for a technical crew. So we'll do it. And the thing is, we know our content resonates on radio. You know CityNews content resonates on 1010 because you guys use our content all the time. So thank you for that. We appreciate that. It is. It's good content. And your round table talks about it almost every morning, which is great. We love it. But what's important there is the content, and we need newscasts that put the emphasis on the content, which is what I think all of us, the three of us, are doing.
Kim, can you talk about, because we're not represented properly on the radio side of things.
I can also speak to radio.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, excuse me.
No, I'm happy to have Kim ask Kim a
No.
question, but
Well, I'm just curious about the radio benefits from it can actually go live and it can happen now, but then it's gone. And if you're not tuning into the radio at that exact moment, game over. So how do you honor the people that are showing up and want the information an hour later?
So let me just jump in there, because our integration between radio and TV and digital, I don't even think to speak about it because it's so ingrained in our culture. And what our reporters do, and in particular our foreign reporters, I'll take our London bureau because they're often going places quickly and alone. When you have the supports domestically, it's a bit of a different situation because you might have an additional reporter or a truck. But I'll take Thomas Degla, our London, our most junior London correspondent, but an incredible guy who's going to have an incredible career. And you know, I think about the day that he went to the Barcelona terrorist attacks and how he fed everybody through focused storytelling. He immediately was on the radio, you know, filing just quickly what he could, posting pictures, obviously doing social as he went. And then he quickly did something using his phone, just walking in the crowd and talking to people about their reaction. And that was played on our news network, which fed them for several hours. And it was so strong that they ended up running a version of it on the National that night. And it all comes down to the quality of the kind of reporting he was doing. He wasn't trying to run around and get all kinds of different little bits and pieces. And so radio is being served, television is being served, digital is being served. And in terms of what's going on with radio, I love talking about radio, and it's in my portfolio as well. So I want to be clear that we are investing in what's happening in digital radio just as much. You know, we're now on Amazon Alexa, and you can listen to our hourly updates and hear whatever reporting Thomas or anybody else is doing. And we believe that the future of audio, which most people believe is going to be voice enabled, so that you're having some sort of dialogue with it, is going to lead to a shelf life, to your question, for audio, so that you could come back and somebody tell me more about the forest fires. And there might be Cam's reporting, possibly from several hours earlier or the day before. And that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for depth and context and for feature reporting in audio to continue to have a shelf life in the way that we're seeing it with video and text in digital right now.
And let me add, you know, you mentioned Thomas went out with his cell phone. And I think that is a tool for every radio reporter out there, which is an iPhone. We had an example with our sister radio station in Calgary, the emergency landing of the plane on the highway there. So he reported for radio in the morning, but then you know, he found time and grabbed his phone and did an on camera, literally a selfie on camera, which we were then able to turn into a television story. We cut it, and it ran on our 5 and 6 o'clock newscasts that night with the video. So, you know, it's about really ditching the traditional sense of what we think a story is and constructing a story. Well, and all the labor. It's so labor intensive, and it's relieving yourself of all of that and realizing, no, you don't need to do all that. You can actually take a load off yourself, but then also serve the platforms that you need to serve.
It's interesting, we're in a 4K world. However, people they don't want that necessarily. As long as what you're producing is interesting or gives them the information they need, they will watch.
I always say the videos
video
that go viral are shot, first of all, like this.
Yep.
And it's in the dark, and it's grainy, and you can't see it, but yet they get millions of views, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, because it's also speaking to people in the language that they understand, right? Like in particular with the younger audience, I mean, they are creating these this is how they talk to themselves, between themselves, right? Like, and so, I mean, I think it makes sense that that's, you know, if you talk about like how people are connecting with how the information is being presented to them.
Any other questions or comments or discussion jump-off points? You have to talk into the blue pillow. I won't accept anything other. Google is recording you, and we'll email your friends.
Sponsorship for this, believe me, and they had the highest profile of this conference.
Is that right?
Everyone loves the Google box. Just further to what Michael was saying, you're all saying, is like we're just learning so much in the news industry about new workflows. So it's really about non-traditional, like the platform and programming and, you know, the silos. It just doesn't exist anymore. I was interviewing a young guy in Edmonton last week that, you know, is a radio current affairs producer who, when he does his pre-interviews for his talk tape, as they call it on radio. These using those notes, of course, to write an in-depth online piece that he works on, for a couple hours, and then when he's live on his radio program, he's got that companion piece. And I just thought, it sounds so, oh, of course, when you talk about it, but something like that just wouldn't have existed a couple years ago, 3-5 years ago, where you're thinking about how you're gathering your material and then thinking about all the 5 different ways that material can be distributed, specific to whatever platform you're on, and if anything, that's what we've learned, is just how every single platform requires its own treatment, but it's all there if you're gathering the material, and then it's not a similar experience for your audience, and that's where the real draw is for growth, because people really, as you rightly point out, you're speaking to them in the language that they're speaking themselves.
It's also interesting. When I worked at MTV, we were on the forefront of, as far as getting things out digitally and not being worried about television ratings, et cetera, but it was always still drive it back to the broadcast, drive it back. And now that's gone, where your Instagram video is unrelated necessarily to your radio broadcast, to your TV you have to honor the audience that's finding it on. The Instagram person isn't going to go click a YouTube link in your bio. It's just 3 steps. It's a pain in the neck. Give them the information they want on Instagram. And that's that. That's how they consume your story. And if they happen to find you on YouTube, they're not going to go click your Twitter link to go find them. You can't send people on a rat race. Just give it to them where they are and be content, and then add everything up and try to make money.
And also understand what it is that audiences are looking for in certain spaces. So this is something that I continue to learn from the team that we have that socializes our content, which is, we'll write a story about this thing that happened and put a headline on it, which is this, this is the thing you need to know about it. But then when you talk to the social producer, they're always encouraging me to zero in on an emotion in that story that isn't what I think the story is about, but is the thing that will connect with with the audience when they're scrolling past. So, it's a constant challenge for me, because I don't, you adopt it eventually, but that's not how I conceive of the stuff that we're doing, right? And, but it's interesting to see how that works, right? And that kind of, that's the expectation in a certain kind of space. So on Twitter, for example, right? Just the real emotional angle of something that might be a buried piece of that story, but that can come alive in that space, and then maybe bring different people to it.
And if that's all they get from the story, that's all they get from the story. And you have to be content with that, which is tough, because you spend so much time and effort making this great thing. It's
true, but what we're hoping is that will bring them in. Right. We just need to bring them in, and so then hopefully they'll spend some time.
Yeah, it's a constantly balanced relationship across days, weeks, months, and a year, where people might be seeing something in Instagram and something in broadcast, and or seeing something in passing. We know about the glanceability factor in news is so significant right now, where people aren't deeply engaging. They're literally just seeing it go by. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I'm always amazed at how much she knows about the news, yet she's not engaging with it just because of her age, but she just sees it she sees it mostly in Snapchat. And that it's something where you're just lightly becoming aware of brands, and so you know that City's there for you on certain things, and Vice is there for you on things, and CBC's there for you on things. It all comes back, everything that I think we're all agreeing on here, to if you've got a great story, it kind of works on every platform. You can just pull other little bits and pieces of it out, and whether it's the National, which now has a photographer on staff so that we can maximize what we're doing in Instagram and social. That's done on purpose. And if it doesn't draw back to video and broadcast, that's totally okay with us, because it's just creating new relationships with the quality of the journalism, so that when people want to go into something deeper because they actually want to watch it on television, they'll know what that is. And kids like my daughter actually will understand, oh, that's a brand that brings me this.
Was there a question in the... Yes.
Throw it.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Good throw, good arm.
My question specifically is for Natalie, but anybody could answer. One of the pieces that got my students buzzing the most this year was Elle's piece from Charlottesville. I think most people maybe have seen it, and yet it has elements of very traditional storytelling, and it was just so powerful. Did it change any ways that you do things, or what impact?
I mean, I think that was, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, that's okay.
That was maybe the moment that Vice News Tonight arrived. I mean, Vice is a much more recognizable brand in the United States than it is here in Canada, I think. But even so, I mean, they're battling a incredibly competitive media market. And the thing with that piece was that, as Francis has talked about, I mean, the show just blew up its format for that day. And that was interesting because it was an event that happened over the weekend, and this show, I can't remember if it came out on the Monday or the Tuesday afterwards. So, resisting the urge to be on the thing and show something that's happening now, knowing that what you're going to provide is a different journey, really. I mean, for us here in Canada, I mean, we were incredibly I guess impressed, but then also encouraged to see that kind of piece of content resonated, really.
So, I'm sorry, I missed what story we're talking about.
So Vice News Tonight, a reporter, Elspeth Reeve, embedded with the white supremacists at the Charlottesville rally.
Gotcha.
And spoke. Sorry?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know the latest number. Yeah. No, yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
But
I mean,
why?
and that
Because the reporting was different. It was from within, and it didn't have to be turned around that night, right?
Yeah.
The story does live. And again, because people, yes, I'm sure they knew about Charlottetown, they knew about the vehicle, they knew all of that, but to bring them inside and in depth was different content. It was differentiated content that anyone can do at a local level, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, I sat in one of these sessions and listened to the heads of the investigative group say, and one of them said, if you're a local newsroom, do not try to do investigative work. And I don't buy that. I'm sorry, because we do that on a daily basis at City News. We're up for awards for that. We win awards for that, and you can do it. You can turn around good content in a day or two, because it doesn't need to respond to the immediacy of the event. It can live on a day or two later.
Yeah, and I mean, the beauty of that piece was just simply the access of it, right? The fact that yes, Elspeth was part of it, but really we were just watching things unfold, right? So it wasn't the traditional. There were moments where the main character was challenged and stuff, but the value of it was seeing what these people were doing and thinking and saying. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Well, there was a.
Yeah.
Hey, I was just going to quickly ask, are you guys putting content on Snapchat, and what's the engagement like on that?
So we are putting individual stories on Snapchat now, and we'll be announcing something soon about what we're doing in Canada, but we're investing there. And we see,
Yeah, just do it
we
now.
see, I'm my head spinning, I said to Natalie before, I said, my job today is to not get in trouble. So I'm not going to say anything more. But we're investing there, and we're seeing significant growth in Snapchat when we look at projections. Instagram and Snapchat are much preferred to younger demographics. Everybody talks about Facebook, and it's a monster still, a problematic monster, as we all know. But we're determined to invest in the spaces, and you fish where the fish are swimming, and that is all coming back. We're already talking about the kind of content that's going to work in Snapchat. I mean, New York Times is successfully there. Le Monde in France is the biggest Snapchat daily edition that they have for millennials in France right now. These are serious organizations, so we don't have to get all silly to be in this space. They still want to know what's going on with an explosion in the city or a forest fire in Manitoba, and so we're just looking at how we face that in terms of the kind of video and graphics and text that we'll be using. but we'll just fold it into our operations. And while it's a different technical output, just the way every new thing is, whether it's Amazon Alexa or Snapchat, at the center of it, if you're out there telling stories, taking pictures, getting information, getting video, it's ultimately all the same thing.
You know, remember when Vine was big?
Yeah,
The
good
problem
point.
with social media is that there's always something new around the corner, and we've specifically chosen to dedicate a lot of resource to Facebook and Twitter, and now Instagram as well with Insta Stories. But we're always evolving, and it's not that we haven't used Snapchat, we have through individuals, but for us right now, I think we need to concentrate on, again, where a lot of those fish are for us, which is Facebook right now. It's pretty massive.
You have the last word if you want it, Natalie.
I mean, I can't speak to the level of engagement, to be honest. Vice is on Snapchat. The Canadian operations are not yet on Snapchat. That is something we're working towards, though, yeah.
Okay. All right, we're good? All right, thank you all for the good questions and the great discussion, and yeah, enjoy your weekend. Thanks, really nice to...